90%. Let that number sit for a moment. Not 90% of a company, not 90% of a market, 90% of all the oil in an entire country. Every lamp lit in America, every machine lubricated, every refinery running, 9 out of every 10 drops of oil moving through the United States passed through one man's hands. And the government decided that was too much power for one person to hold, so they broke his company apart, and he got richer. His name was John D. Rockefeller, and what you are about to discover is not just the story of how one man accumulated the largest personal fortune in modern history. It is the story of how he thought, how he saw things that other people looked at every day and missed completely, and why the strategies he used in the oil fields of Pennsylvania in the 1860s are the same strategies that build empires today. First, you need to understand the world Rockefeller was born into, because his genius only makes sense when you see the chaos he was born into. It is 1839. Rockefeller grows up in rural New York, the son of a con man. His father, William Avery Rockefeller, sold fake cancer cures from a wagon and was frequently absent, sometimes gone for months. His mother, Eliza, ran the household on almost nothing. She taught John 3 things early: keep accounts, waste nothing, and give a portion of everything away. He kept a ledger from the age of 16. Every cent that came in, every cent that went out. He called it his Bible. Not a metaphor, he meant it literally. The ledger was the document he trusted most. He got his first job at 16 as a bookkeeper. He was so precise, so detail-oriented, that his employers quickly realized he understood the business better than most of the men who had been there for years. He saved aggressively. He invested carefully. And in 1859, when oil was discovered in Titusville, Pennsylvania, and the world changed overnight, Rockefeller watched. He did not rush in. That is the first thing you need to understand about how he thought. While hundreds of men flooded into Pennsylvania to drill for oil, wild-eyed and desperate, Rockefeller watched them from Cleveland and took notes. He saw what they couldn't see from inside the frenzy. He saw that finding oil was not where the real money was. Anyone could find oil. Prices would collapse. Drillers would go broke. The real money was in controlling what happened to the oil after it came out of the ground. Refining, transportation, distribution, the infrastructure. That was where the permanent advantage lived. He entered the oil business in 1863, not as a driller, but as a refiner. And from the moment he entered, he operated by principles that most of his competitors had never even considered. The first principle was cost. Rockefeller was obsessed with cost in a way that bordered on the extreme. While other refiners accepted the going price for barrels, for transport, for labor, Rockefeller questioned every single line item. He discovered that the wooden barrels used to transport oil cost around $2.50 each when purchased from a supplier. He calculated that he could make them himself for under $1. So he built his own barrel-making operation. He brought the cooperage in-house. He did not stop there. He looked at every input the refinery required and asked the same question every time. Why are we paying someone else to do this when we could do it ourselves? He built his own warehouses. He ran his own pipelines. He owned his own tank cars. He bought his own forest to supply the wood. Historian Ron Chernow, whose biography of Rockefeller remains the definitive account, describes this approach as vertical integration taken to a degree that had never been seen before in American industry. Rockefeller did not just want to win the competition, he wanted to make competition structurally impossible. And here's where his thinking becomes truly extraordinary. He went to the railroads. In the 1860s and 1870s, the railroads were the internet of their time. Whoever controlled the shipping routes controlled commerce itself. Rockefeller negotiated a secret deal with the major railroads. In exchange for guaranteeing enormous, predictable volumes of oil shipments, the railroads gave him a rebate, a private discount that his competitors did not receive. He paid less per barrel to ship than anyone else. And because his costs were lower across every part of the operation, he could undercut any competitor on price and still make a profit while they were losing money. Then he made them an offer. Sell to me, or compete against me knowing that you cannot win. Most sold. Some tried to fight. He ground them down through price, through access to rail, through the sheer scale of capital he had accumulated. By 1879, Standard Oil controlled approximately 90% of American oil refining. Not because Rockefeller was dishonest, though his methods were ruthless. Because he had built a machine that ran more efficiently than anything his competitors could construct. Journalist Ida Tarbell spent years investigating Standard Oil and published her findings in 1904 in a series that became one of the most famous pieces of investigative journalism in American history. She documented the secret railroad deals, the deliberate price manipulation, the systematic crushing of independent refiners. She described it as a machine for destroying competition. And she was not wrong. What she also documented, though it received less attention, was that Rockefeller's operation consistently delivered oil to consumers at lower prices than any competitor ever had. The machine that destroyed competition also served consumers efficiently. That contradiction sits at the heart of everything Rockefeller built. In 1911, the Supreme Court of the United States ruled that Standard Oil was an illegal monopoly, and ordered it broken into 34 separate companies. The press celebrated. Rockefeller's rivals celebrated. And then something strange happened. The stock in each of the 34 new companies was distributed to Standard Oil's shareholders. Rockefeller was the largest shareholder. The combined value of the 34 companies, once they were free to operate independently and once the market understood what they were actually worth, rose dramatically. Rockefeller, who had been worth an estimated $300 million before the breakup, ended up wealthier after it. The companies that came out of that breakup include ExxonMobil, Chevron, and several others that remain among the largest corporations on Earth today. He had not just built a company. He had built an ecosystem of companies that outlived the legal structure he had created to hold them together. Historian T.J. Stiles has written that the Standard Oil breakup is one of the great ironies of American economic history. The government's attempt to reduce Rockefeller's power inadvertently demonstrated just how much underlying value he had created. Each fragment was worth more free than it had been as part of the whole. Now, how do you put a number on what he was worth? This is where the comparisons become almost incomprehensible. At its peak, Rockefeller's net worth was estimated at around $900 million in the early 1900s. The United States GDP at the time was approximately $22 billion. His personal fortune represented roughly 2% of the entire American economy. To match that proportion today, a single individual would need to hold somewhere between $400 billion and $1 trillion, depending on the methodology used. Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk combined do not reach that figure. There's been no one like him in the modern era. And yet, Rockefeller gave most of it away. From his first paycheck at 16, he gave 10% to his church. Not after he became rich, from the first dollar. He kept the ledger that documented every donation just as carefully as he kept the ledger that documented every business expense. By the end of his life, he had given away more than $500 million in 1900s money. He funded the University of Chicago. He created the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research, now Rockefeller University, which has produced 26 Nobel Prize winners. He funded the campaign to eradicate hookworm from the American South, a parasitic disease that was keeping millions of children out of school and in poverty. His foundation funded the development of the yellow fever vaccine. The public health infrastructure he helped create saved lives that can now be numbered in the hundreds of millions. Biographer Ron Chernow argues that Rockefeller's philanthropy was not separate from his business mind. It was an expression of the same thinking. He identified the highest leverage interventions, the places where a dollar of investment would generate the most return in human welfare, and he deployed capital there with the same discipline he deployed it in oil refining. He was not sentimental about giving. He was strategic. The results were proportional to the strategy. He lived to 97. He outlived most of his rivals, his critics, the journalists who investigated him, and the politicians who broke up his company. He played golf every day in his later years, kept his accounts until near the end, and gave dimes to children he met on the street because he believed small acts of generosity were as important as large ones. There's a question worth sitting with here. Was Rockefeller great or was he ruthless? The answer, if you look honestly at the evidence, is that he was both simultaneously, and the discomfort of holding both of those things at once is exactly the point. The same precision that made him squeeze every fraction of a cent out of a barrel operation also made him precise about where his money could do the most good. The same relentlessness that crushed independent refiners also drove him to fund medical research that eliminated diseases. The machine had one setting, maximum efficiency, and it ran the same way whether the input was oil or philanthropy. You woke up this morning in a world that runs, in significant part, on infrastructure that Rockefeller either built or made possible. The oil industry is a global system, the philanthropic foundation model that every major charitable institution now uses. The university research model that has produced more scientific progress than any government program in history. He did not just accumulate wealth, he built architecture. And architecture, unlike gold, does not scatter when the man who built it dies. 90% of the oil, 34 companies, 26 Nobel Prize winners, hundreds of millions of lives touched by public health initiatives his money funded, and a dime given to a child on a golf course in Ohio because he believed it mattered. That is what one man's obsession with efficiency, deployed across a lifetime, actually looks like. The question is not whether you will ever control 90% of anything. The question is whether you are keeping the ledger, whether you know where every cent is going, whether you are asking every day the same question Rockefeller asked every morning when he opened his accounts. Is this the most efficient use of what I have? Because that question, asked consistently enough over a long enough period of time, is how 90% happens. If this changed the way you think about money, there's someone else in history who will change it again. Subscribe. I'll find them for you.